Hello and welcome. I'm Garima, your host for today's webinar. I'm so glad that you're joining us on the Dais today for our very first live broadcast. With so much happening around and things changing so fast, we wanted to come together with you to discuss this shared challenge. In these tough times, we believe there's a need to simplify the conversation, and we all must come together as an industry. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers on the Dais today. Gaurav Sharma, he's a senior oil markets analyst and a Forbes columnist. And Mr. Balaji Chennakrishnan, he's the CEO of Telesto Energy, an enterprise focused on bringing new technologies to the oil and gas business. Thank you so much for joining us. Here's a little something for our audience. We would like this webinar to be interactive, and you can see there's a chat box and a column for questions right next to the main screen. Shoot your questions and drop in your messages. Also, we'll be putting up polls and short surveys during the discussion. We would love to see you participate. There's just one humble request, since there are so many webinars taking place and the internet might go down. If by any chance there's any technical glitch, please bear with us. We will fix that soon and we'll be online as soon as possible. There will be a Q&A by the end of the discussion where you can put across your questions for our speakers. Let's begin then. Gaurav, help us understand the situation from the demand perspective. There have been marathon discussions around the historic production cut by OPEC+. What was being described as a Mexican standoff, you referred to it as a bad burrito in your recent article. And now under the new agreement, what do you think we are looking at? Do you think, is it a temporary relief for the energy sector?
Well, first of all, let me just thank Garima. Let me just thank you and your team for having me on this webinar. It's great to be having this dialogue. And of course, as industry fate would have it or luck would have it, it's come at the most opportune time because you've given the perfect backstory. Now, we've had this entire Easter break where all sorts of world powers, consumers, exporters of oil combined came together and struck what is being described as a historic deal. It was held up by Mexico, but in the end, the sort of magnitude or the volume basis of the deal pretty much stayed the same at 9.7 million barrels per day. Now, the reason I described it as a bad burrito rather than a Mexican standoff, because I always felt that there'll be some jiggery-pokery, there'll be some market fudge, and that the Mexicans would eventually come around to supporting the deal. It is a bad burrito. Not only is it a bad burrito, it's also, being served to a restaurant full of punters who have no appetite. And that's how I draw the analogy. You can cut as much as you want. And in this case, OPEC plus or OPEC plus G20, whatever acronym, chimes with you, they have come up with a cut that is only a third of what near-term global oil demand is likely to plummet by. So this deal comes into place in June and will be reviewed in July and be lowered. But in the time, whether we are looking at April, May, or June, demand is going to be knocked by somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 million barrels per day. So this cut is only a third, roughly a third, maximum half. No, India is in lockdown, one of the world's third largest oil importers. Right. China is in a host of trouble. It got us here in the first place. Right. Japan, South Korea, the United States, and if you look elsewhere, it's grounded. We're driving less. It's an question. So historic cut doesn't really quite cut it, because as long as let me rephrase that. Up and until we get a handle on the
Hello, Gaurav. Gaurav, can you hear me? I think we have Mr. Balaji, can you hear me?
Yes, Garima, I can hear you.
Yes. Meanwhile, Gaurav comes back. Would you like to add something to that?
I think he's coming back online.
Yes, he's coming back.
I guess we're in strange times, but perhaps the internet connection dropped out. But yes, as I was saying, let me just quickly conclude. Seconds there. I think let me quickly conclude is that unless the demand returns, there will be no takers for this bad burrito. The demand has to return. The global community has to get a handle on the coronavirus. Until then, you can cut as much as you like. It won't have the tangible impact.
Right. Gaurav, also, do you feel that it is too little and too late, this decision?
I think it is. And also the fact that this situation is of OPEC Plus's own making. They were belligerent on the 6th of March. They got together in Vienna. They had a massive row, and the Saudis and the Russians went either way. And that created the situation whereby which an oil industry which was already in trouble, things worsened for it. So not only was it a crisis of demand, it became a crisis of oversupply and demand, and that to use the cricket expression, that hit the market for six.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Gaurav. Mr. Balaji, heading over to you. What do you think the current business climate looks like right now?
Okay, thanks Garima and Energy Dais for organizing this webinar. It's aptly titled Analyzing the Impact of COVID-19 on the Oil and Gas Industry. And thanks Gaurav for joining, and I also thank the participants for their interest. And I hope there will be some good insight for them to take back home. And before I start, first of all, I want all of you to stay safe because these are like very, very trying times. The business climate, I would like to split that into 4 different points. One is how the oil prices have behaved, and in terms of the events that's been happening in the past quarter, some of which Gaurav already covered, and what that is doing to the supply and the storage, and how that's affecting the companies. And to do that, I'll just like to share some of the. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. Can you see, Garima?
I cannot see, sir. Can you see, Gaurav?
No, unfortunately not. Maybe we can upload it as a media. That could possibly be one of the alternatives. I think.
Let's
so you can try again once more. Not a problem.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I think there's some issue in sharing the screen. Okay, what I will do is I'll just take back on the 5 points. What was happening for the oil prices was it was roughly around $60 per barrel in the beginning of January. And it was slightly sliding because of some supply concerns. And by the mid-Jan, the corona impact was beginning to show in China. And Goldman Sachs has already warned that's going to have an impact on the oil prices. But by the end of Feb, it was very clear that this is going to be a major pandemic, and it's going to hit most of the world. And the world was looking at major global recession, and that kind of hit the prices very hard. And it came down to somewhere around $30 a barrel by the end of February. And for some strange reasons, and the Russians and the Saudis wanted to play some pumping game, and then it was sliding, it was going race to bottom. That was what happening to the oil price, and by the end of March it was close to 20. So what that did was what Gaurav mentioned, it has hit the supply and demand equation very hard. There was huge oversupply, and some estimate by IHS market that the first quarter there was about 78% oversupply, and this quarter they are expecting the demand growth to go down by 15 to 20%. I mean, that's huge. And there is no recovery like seen in the near future. Like they expect maybe sometime coming in the first quarter of 2021. We don't know like yet how this is going to happen, like given the way the corona pandemic is happening and like different governments are under lockdown. So what that has done, like the storage capacity, now like at one estimate by IHS Markit says that like by the end of like the second quarter, we are going to have a surplus of like close to 1.6 to 1.7 billion barrels of oil. Unfortunately, there is not enough storage all over the globe to store that oil. I mean, like it's not even the storage is a kind of skewed one. Like in some places you have lot storage, but the production is elsewhere. And I mean, even whatever you try, like this is going to be a major impact. So how this is affecting the companies, and like this is a key question, because now like you have a global economic recession and there is excess production, there is storage issue, and obviously oil companies are taking a hit. And I have done some study on like how this has impacted the valuation of like majors, and like what I could see was like global oil majors like Exxon, Shell, ENI, Total, and all put together some 7-8 companies, and their valuation like by sometime around like September 2019 was close to 1.1 trillion. On March 31st, like they were close to like lost around like 630 billion dollars in valuation. That's a massive 60% hit in the valuation. That's on the global majors. And I did some study on like how it has affected the Indian companies like Oil India, ONGC, HOAC, Cain, Vedanta, all same. Like they all lost like 60 to 70%. And the same goes for like even the major service companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker. So the scenario is like it has affected all the companies across the board globally, like oil majors, independents, NOCs, service companies, all of them got affected. So then came the OPEC plus deal, whatever it called. Like, I mean, the opinion is kind of divided. Like some people say it's too little or too late. I would put it this way. Now, like we are all in the corona, like most of the countries are in a lockdown. So like this OPEC plus deal is a kind of lockdown. Like we may have our third crisis, but we don't know like whether we actually solve the problem or how the problem is going to come. Thanks very much.
Yes. Also, Mr. Balaji, just this morning, our PM announced that the lockdown will be extended till the May 3rd. How are you looking at the situation? How do you think it is going to affect the oil prices and the Indian oil market with this development? How do you see it evolving from here?
Okay, right now the operations are getting hit very hard, because of the travel restrictions. As you know, like oil industry is like very, very globalized industry. Like people travel across the world. So like the operation part is like heavily affected. Second thing is like in remote installations, like you cannot afford someone falls sick. Like it's, the situation is like very, very serious. Even if you're falling sick at your home, it's a problem. Now imagine somebody on an oil rig falling sick. So like this has affected the operations very badly. But the industry was kind of picking up during the last quarter of like 2019 and last 2 quarters of 2019. Like there are more investments kind of like planning to come down. Some studies were like kind of like study projects. Those are still going on. But the real impact is not going to be really, something. How would I say? Like it's not it's a kind of bad thing, I would say. But like we'll have to wait and see, and we are maybe like by third quarter we will have some clear picture on like where we are and probably like how companies come back. That's very important, because like whatever predictions and estimates and all those things anybody can say, how companies bounce back, like when things become normal, like that's a key. So I think it's a wait and watch game. Garima?
I think we may have some internet issues with Garima. I think we'll wait for us to come back. But I'll deliberate with you, Mr. Balaji. I think you made a very crucial point as to all these economies that are sort of shutting down or are in lockdown mode. Whether we are looking at the subcontinent, especially India, the powerhouse of the subcontinent, and of course the powerhouse of Asia. We're looking at the French president having said overnight that France is closed for business till the 11th of May. In England, they seem to be pretty much nailed on somewhere between the 7th of May and the 11th of May. And various countries are sort of working it out at what point in the summer they announce an end of the lockdown. Now, the key issue here is that whether it's 11th of May, 18th of May, or even middle of June, however, whichever date whomsoever comes up with, the key thing is that April is pretty dire for demand. May is almost certainly, at least half of May is looking pretty bad. And if we go further down the summer, June is not looking terribly good as well. So if you look at the second quarter as a whole, demand is looking pretty dire. So what OPEC Plus and its allies were attempting to do was to stem the bleeding. Basically, as you were alluding to, the 66% decline that they saw in the first quarter, they basically want to hold the fort at where we are. They're not even thinking right now that it might, at some point over the third quarter. I think one of the listeners has asked this question at some point, and there's several comments about this on the chat, that they're not even thinking right now that at some point in Q3 or Q4, the price might get bumped up to 40. They're in survival mode. Now, the other that survival mode is linked to what you just alluded to, that the various economic trajectories. A lot was made about this whole G20 participating and everything else. And I think in previous conversations that you and I have had, and me and Garima have had, and all three of us have had, there is some consensus between the three of us that not every G20 economy would mind lower oil price.
That's true.
So, for India, especially for the Strategic Reserves Department, maybe not Indian Oil and others, if oil hits 2025 or West Texas stays quite where it is right now, Diwali has indeed come early at a time like that.
That's true. But what this people are not realizing is like there is no place to hide. And my concern is like when you hit the full storage capacity and you still keep pumping them up, I'm really scared of what's going to happen that time.
Absolutely.
Also, Mr. Pradhan is talking about strategic petroleum reserves. What would you say? What India needs to focus on right now?
I think should I go first, or would Mr. Balaji like to proceed first? Sure.
Gaurav, you can start.
Sure. So, I've had previous conversations with Minister Pradhan when he's spoken at OPEC seminar. He gave a very powerful speech at OPEC seminar saying that, maybe the time has, and that point in time also the oil industry was facing a lower for longer crisis of a different nature. This is a total collapse, but that was different. 2016, they had their own little crisis. $100 oil prices were becoming a thing of the past. And what Mr. Pradhan said at the time was that maybe the world should now look at having long-term contracts for oil deliveries, sort of like natural gas supplies. And that was a very powerful statement. There was pin drop silence at OPEC. It should have been, and I'm glad he said that, because for the consumers right now, the last thing they want, especially when they're grappling with a crisis, is for the oil price to get bumped up. How much the economy might diversify away from fossil fuels is a different conversation we might come to later in the podcast, in the webinar. But the one key thing here is for the Strategic Reserves Department, basically what ISIRL is attempting to do is to build the capacity. The capacity is not quite up to scratch yet, but the offshoot of the Ministry of Petroleum, as it is wholly controlled by them, they have gone to certain lengths to secure the backing of the Saudis and of the United Arab Emirates to have these supplies delivered at a price point, kind of going back to what Mr. Pradhan said all those years ago, 4 years ago. And that is very, very critical. So the strategic reserves guys don't necessarily mind the lower prices. It's just elsewhere in the industry, how that matters and how that's going to percolate, and how the changing Indian economy or the changing subcontinent economy might reflect that. That's another matter. But for the strategic reserves guys, I think it's good news.
Right. Also, we have some very interesting comments and questions coming up in our chat session. Hopefully, we will be able to address that during the Q&A.
Sure.
Yes. Gaurav, also with this OPEC plus deal, we can see that the oil prices have moved a bit higher. But as you can see, the general sentiment remains that the crude is going to struggle a lot to rebound. How would you explain that? What do you think is happening here?
I think it's a fool's game to make an absolute prediction on where the oil price is going to go. But right now, what I'm saying, I think what my assertion right now is that OPEC has basically scrambled to provide a floor. So if Brent holds at 30 and West Texas holds at about $25, they would consider their job done for the next 6 to 8 weeks. They're in survival mode right now, essentially. 30, I think 30 will be under pressure, because once all these demand forecasts start coming in, that's when we'll realize how serious the situation is. And right now, the most optimistic demand forecast before we went live that I looked at, even the most optimistic demand decline forecast is somewhere in the region of 18.5 million barrels per day, which is almost twice over what OPEC has done. And the most pessimistic forecast is somewhere in the region of 35 million barrels per day, largely predicated on US airports being, falling silent and Heathrow not operating, and RGI shuttered. Some of the biggest airports in the world are pretty silent, and aviation fuel is a huge driver. Mm-hmm. So especially for closer to home in India, it's a big driver. Anybody from IOL to some of the airlines would testify to that, and that is again compounding the storage worries. And Mr. Balaji mentioned storage. By my estimation, let's say you wear a sort of a skeptic's hat, and you take all the forecasts, whether it's IHS, Standard Chartered, Goldman, take all their forecasts on storage, and you draw an average. Who's saying what? Cut it off, divide it by 6 players, draw an average. It is highly likely that by the middle of May, we will run out of storage space. Whether we're talking Cushing, Oklahoma, in the subcontinent, Fujairah, wherever you look at it, it's going to be really, really tight. And then, no matter what these guys do, the production cuts are likely to be over 9.7 million barrels a day. But the oil price, it is stuck where it is, 50 cents plus or minus, as we have noticed, 48 hours after the deal has been struck. And we're kind of stuck there. We are not going to see 40s or an uptick, in my humble opinion, until very late into the year, the third or the fourth, end of the third quarter, early fourth quarter.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Balaji, since businesses have been majorly affected, how important do you feel is the need to collaborate for the industry at this point of time? How important is collaboration right now?
Yeah. It's from the discussion we are having so far, what is very clear, the pandemics like COVID-19 can have a significant impact on across the oil and gas value chain. So companies really need to relook at the way they are doing business, and for that, collaboration is the key. And before I go into kind of collaborations that companies can look into, I just want to give a brief on what companies are actually doing to avert this crisis. One thing that most of the companies are, be it majors or NOCs or independents, they're all cutting and slashing their budgets. The capex budgets are slashed, and most of the companies, the biggies, cutting it down somewhere between $2 billion to $10 billion. And remember, these budgets are for financial year 2020, just starting from January. They're not even started to spend this money, they're already slashing it. And this is one thing. And like they're all reaching out to all the suppliers and asking them like prepare for a price cut, and renegotiating the contracts. And the companies are kind of like selling their assets, the distressed assets, and production cuts. Of course, production cuts are happening across the board. Then they are looking at asset sales. I mean, that's one good thing that's happening. Like especially from an Indian perspective, like a lot of stressed assets are being sold. I mean, this is the time like we should take our, like a shopping bag and go around. It's a good time to buy. So that's what companies are doing. Like some of the small things like the share buybacks and all those things are put on. So then there are some surveys that predicts like how this is going to impact on the investment scenario going forward. It's like in 2020 alone, like we are going to see something like $100 billion like cut in terms of like investment. So that's a huge money. Like, I mean, we just finished one quarter and like we are already seeing like 100 billion, and this is we don't know, like this is like the number that we have until 31st March, and like it could change also going forward. And how this is affecting the employment industry, because I see some of the questions like people are interested to know like how it's going to affect the recruitment scenario, whether there will be jobs and all these things. Unfortunately, like the estimates and predictions are like very, very eerie. Like some estimates say like it could be like up to 1 million jobs cut across the board for oil and gas. And there are some estimates saying that at least some 30% or 40% of them are due to the corona impact, and the rest is due to the way oil prices behaving. So having said all this, I mean, like this is not a very, very bad picture. And see, like estimates are always estimates, and like there is something called a human element, and like, companies have always bounced back. So like the way to do is like collaboration across different levels. Like one, you can say like between companies, and between companies, I mean, like you can share data, share resources, share facilities, so that you can bring down your cost and like work more efficiently. And now this corona impact and like has shown us like how collaboration is very effective. Like you see the kind of collaboration you've never seen before across like countries, like industries. I mean, different industries, different kind of people, like social service people, like the hospitality sector, and like from all walks of life, they're coming to collaboration. That's something like oil and gas industry should look at. Then the second point is like very important, because the industry and academia, because now the industry should put more emphasis on like having the academics on board, because especially for a country like India, a lot of like universities and like students like who are really bright, and like maybe look at the research collaboration, look at developing technologies with universities, or maybe like you can kind of like do part of the project with the universities, like so that the students get exposure, and like you also do more collaboration. And the most important collaboration, like I would like to say, is like between the government and the financial institutions. And now like there's a lot of financial incentives are being announced by various governments, like a huge amount of money. Like Trump has said like some $2.2 trillion. So this is very important now, like especially for the small to medium companies, or like the government should provide them like financial support, and especially the banks and other financial institutions, like they should be like lenient, because they have to help them to like tide over this cash flow issue. And the government should go ease on the regulatory compliance issue. Like in India, like the major problem with the small to medium industries not doing business, actually complying with the government requirements, that should, I would even suggest them like announce a tax holiday for 1 year. I mean, how does it matter? So just let them focus on the business. And finally, like some of the legal issues the government needs to fix globally, and especially in this part of the world, like companies don't pay for the work that you do. I mean, like that legal framework should be very, very tightened, and like the erring companies should be punished. I mean, small companies, I know, like because I run one of them, like one of the challenges that we face is like collecting invoice payments, for the work we have done. Like it's a challenge, and and finally, I would say like technology. Technology is going to be a major lever here, and with all the kind of collaboration and technology implementation, like we can kind of like tide over the crisis. And so your question is very apt. Collaboration is the key.
Yes, sir. Also, just taking this conversation further, how do you think small businesses and manufacturers are going to respond and thrive through this crisis? Because managing the cash flow is definitely not going to be easy. Things are pretty tough. How do you think they can respond to this?
Okay. This is a very, very pertinent and important question, because now we are in the lower for longer price situation. I mean, like this, we don't expect the price to kind of like bounce back very soon. So typically, when I say the small industries like in the oil and gas, most of them work for like operators, and we know like how operators respond when there is a crisis like this. First of all, they do like cut down on all the discretionary spending. Like they're not going to do much on R&D, they're not going to do much on exploration. So because they want to conserve the cash they have. The cash is king now, like they need to have the cash. So like obviously they're going to reduce the capex. And what most of the operators, like already like Exxon and ADNOC and some are doing it, like they're going to come back to the small companies, like and say like, okay, like let's renegotiate the existing contract, reduce your price, like so. This is going to be another pressure like companies are going to face. And this Corona has done one thing, which is like accelerated the digitalization across the industry. There was a joke going on in LinkedIn and WhatsApp, like what accelerated digitalization across the industry. Obviously, Corona is a major factor. But that also has an impact on the small to medium industries, because like the more oil companies digitalize, like maybe some of the services they may not need. I mean, these are all the downsides. But like this is important to know, like how oil companies react, so that the small and medium enterprises can prepare for that. The first thing I would advise is like have an empowered. That's very important. Like have the key people, have an empowered team. Like let them analyze the risk, assess the risk, and see like how do you respond to the different situation. Like how you assess that like your expenditure and like your cash flow situation, your projects, all are like performing efficiently. That's very important. So the second thing is like take care of your employees. Take care of your employees as well as your customers, because that's very critical. Especially if you have people who are going to the field and working there, and make sure that they're absolutely healthy, because like anyone who is falling sick in the situation, it's not an individual issue, it also is a business issue. So like it's very vital to take care of your employees' health and like educate them on the situation, because this virus is going to be around for some more time. That's one thing. Then we also have to be prepared for like this is the operations are like in a new normal. Let's say we need to stabilize the way we operate like in the new normal situation. Then like another thing like this, whenever like somebody is coming to like for a negotiation or like a price negotiation, like try to defend your revenue. It's very important. You need to defend your revenue. So like see whether you can give some additional value addition to companies. And these are like kind of like short-term measures that you can take. And the long-term measures are also very critical. Like I would say like three things. One is like take care of your key people, like the key people are the one like that's going to like help you like bring back a jump into the business, like this thing kind of like normal. That's one thing. Second is like have a like clear-cut digitalization strategy and roll it out. Like this is very important, because what we are doing in Telesto is like we have kind of like fixed protocols and the processes for remote working. Because imagine like you have like projects going in different parts of the world, and like you need to like bring in people and do the project, and the remote working from home, all these kinds of things are going to be the new normal. When I say new normal, like you should think about like how you manage. So when you go to a customer, demonstrate that we are doing like remote working, but your data is safe. And like we are doing projects where the customer has a complete freedom on like what data is being like accessed by the people who are on the project. The clear-cut data audit and data security issues, everything is kind of addressed. So leverage technology. I mean that's very key point. Like otherwise, it's difficult to kind of like survive in this kind of situation. And the most important thing is like have a clear-cut bounce back plan. Like that's very important, because like when suddenly things become normal, you don't know what to do. Like so you need to have a plan, and like you need to go like aggressive when like things are kind of becoming clearer. Even in this situation, like maybe you should focus more on like advertising and digital advertising and marketing and all those things. So these are some of the strategies I would suggest for like small companies to stay relevant. I mean, stay relevant and be there, hang in there. It's very important. Like you need to do all these things to hang in there.
True, sir. True. Very true. Gaurav, would you like to add something to that? Because we are particularly concerned about the small businesses and the manufacturers, and also the startups who had just started to pick up, and then the whole thing has completely changed. What would you say?
Absolutely. I'm going to carry on from where Mr. Balaji left off, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, then we can get a few questions in. I think one key thing is, Mr. Balaji raised a very crucial point, is that the need that that there's a need to support these startups. Now, I've seen a number of commentators have, on the chat have said that a lot of these big oil and gas majors, they're cutting capex. So I'll take that point, and I'll take Mr. Balaji's point of supporting SMEs and for technology as a driver. I'll bring all the three together by simply saying that a number of these majors, both foreign and domestic from an Indian perspective, have cut capex, are likely to cut capex, but the key thing is they're not reducing their spend on R&D. Now, when OPEC last tried to knock these shale players out of the game in 2015, 2016, they thought open the taps and shale will die. And that didn't quite happen, because it was precisely the innovation, the R&D that kept US shale players in the game. This time around, the same will happen. US production will be knocked by 1 million, 1.2 million BPD from sterling heights that it has achieved. But it will not kill off the shale industry. And innovation is where it comes to play. And then you look at all these big majors who are actually expanding, especially their retail outfits in India. What you will need is that a lot of Indian startups, especially the technology-focused startups, will need support. Not just on the regulatory side, but because as Garima, you were saying, suddenly the whole economic headwinds, they were confronted a lot of economic headwinds that they didn't even think of in December 2019. So they'll need support. Modi administration has gone quite a distance in reducing the regulatory burden, but a lot needs to be done. A lot more needs to be done, as Mr. Balaji was saying. And finally, the technology side. The fuel mix is evolving, and India is playing a role there. And what India could do for the energy markets could be the functional equivalent of what Senegal did for the telephony market. Is that they skipped fixed line telephony. A lot of individuals in Senegal, fishermen especially, skipped fixed line telephony and went straight to mobile. India could, a lot of its startups, especially those clustered around Gurgaon, Punjab, Haryana, and southern Indian states, especially the hotbeds of Hyderabad and Bangalore, could then help India bypass a number of fossil steps. Is that the startups, the Industry 4.0 enthusiasts could be the drivers who can just make the transition of India straight from coal to renewables by providing an effective power grid. So that is another aspect. And you know what? This coronavirus created a lot of confusion, a lot of economic distress. But one takeaway I have from what Mr. Balaji said is that whether companies, whether it's small businesses, startups, what they can think of is is to find an opportunity in a crisis. One man's crisis is another man's opportunity.
Right.
And that is where these startups sit, that they can come up with a cluster of innovative solutions. It's a cutthroat world. But if they come up with the appropriate innovative solution in terms of IIoT or Industry 4.0, whatever industry jargon you want to use, then the next 3 to 4 months are going to be crucial. And they will need government supports because revenue would be hard to come by.
Right. Also, since now we are moving towards the end of the discussion, before we take up a few questions from the audience, I would like to know from you, Gaurav, how do you think this whole COVID-19 pandemic is going to reshape the industry?
I think the energy mix is for the near term is going to remain where it is because for two simple reasons. Cars are registered in our brain because we see them the moment we open the door and head out. But the key demand drivers of the oil and gas industry are petrochemicals and aviation. Whether you use the Indian economy or the British economy, you'll pretty much get the same convincing answers. And for that, I don't see any change in the near term. Over the long term, solutions have to be found here, not just electric vehicles. Solutions have to be found here before a tangible difference is made. As for the coronavirus, it will make things very, very tough up until the first quarter of 2021. But I will see, I sincerely hope that there will be some kind of a recovery come middle of July towards the end of July. And a lot of oil producers are also indeed hoping for that. So a turnaround, it will come. It is expected this year. And I suspect that I'm in agreement with some of the ratings agencies on this, like Moody's and S&P, that come the end of July, we will see consumer demand go up, and then by default, you'll see a turnaround in the oil and gas business as well.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Balaji, I would like to know from you, what do you feel are the lessons for the industry at this point of time? Where do you see any silver lining in this whole situation?
Okay, that's a very interesting question because even though the situation looks very bad, it's not all that bad actually. I have seen a situation like this, and there was supposedly Y2K problem. The post Y2K problem, Indian software industry kind of boomed. That was one of the great lever for software to leapfrog to a different level. And I think every crisis there is an opportunity. That's very, very clear. And even now, if you see, the Saudis are like shopping for European oil companies. The Chinese company are like buying all around the globe. And we need to think along that line. Never let a crisis go waste. But this crisis gives you a lot of opportunities. And what oil companies should do, like they should look at the way they do things. They are still very outdated, like old-fashioned. The way of working is like not the new normal. They are nowhere near the what do you call the digital office, or what I call some of my team like the rise of the seismic nerds. The people need to come out of their conventional mode of thinking. And one good example is you should see the students. We get a lot of requests from students for internship because we do a lot of cutting edge work on how to apply artificial intelligence and analytics for oil and gas. And these students are very sharp. They pick up the trends very early. Almost all the students that who wants to do internship are they're coming and in touch with us. They are geologists or petroleum engineers, but they're equally good in Python or R or TensorFlow. That tells you that you have to be good in your core. You have to be a domain expert, of course, no doubt. But you need to use the data and mine the data in a much, much better way. Digitalization is something is the key that companies have to go for it. And another point I would like to emphasize is this is at two levels. One is at the big company levels, maybe if you see in the Indian context, maybe ONGC or Indian Oil, or maybe at the government, or maybe Reliance. They have to set up a kind of sovereign fund. The sovereign fund they should give it to like this kind of small companies or entrepreneurs, and like go and buy assets outside, go and buy good companies outside. Like we need to do something. Like why we should depend on OPEC or Saudis or somebody's and increase our storage. Like we should just go and buy companies outside so that like we ensure like energy supply to India. Like this is what I would say is like securing energy security for India. Like so, this is it's a great opportunity, and like there's going to be a lot of jobs. I'm very confident because like this new normal is going to be like acquiring skills that are both domain and digital, and like India is very well prepared. I'm confident on that. I see it like a lot of students writing to me, and I see them like they're very eager and they're very skillful, and this generation of like youngsters is going to like bring about the change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. You have made some really interesting and valuable points. And now I think it's time we can take some questions from our audience as well. So I would like to start with the first question, which is regarding the job losses. Somebody has asked you, Mr. Balaji, as discussed the job losses. Do you feel that the industry is, the oil and gas companies are prepared for this kind of skill gap?
Okay, skill gaps do exist even now, because if you see the industry has never recovered from the 2015-16 crisis. Like they never ramped up, and like in fact up until last year, like even the beginning of this year, like some companies were like hiring at the same time like firing, because like all their focus was on like cost cutting and like working on the most strategic assets, or like the most possible most profitable assets. So the skill gaps are not yet addressed, and unfortunately the majors or the small companies or like the national companies, they all react in a very like similar fashion. Like when things are going good and like they just like go and buy assets recklessly, and like when things go bad, like they just kind of get into a distress state. So like this skill gaps still needs to be addressed, and unfortunately this job losses is going to like amplify the problem. But one way of looking at this, like right now there are a lot of like innovative and small companies and which are working in like very niche areas to quickly churn through the data and give like a decent insights which would have conventionally taken like few months to do. I mean, these are some areas like where which are complementing or like kind of addressing the skill gaps, but still a long way to go.
Yes. Gaurav, what would you say about this whole price war was going on in the background, and now that has been combined with the COVID-19 situation? What are we looking at?
Well, I think that's a very good one. And I think if you look at the question section, I think one question has been marked up by listeners 8 times, and it's pretty much touches on this thing. How do operators look at this current crisis, and what should be the basis of their commercial evaluation? And there's a very simple answer to that. Right. And I'm not offering investment advice, if players are looking to hedge anywhere in India or all the world, if they're looking at, in my humble opinion, what I would say is that brace your projects and your break-evens and hedge them at $30 for the next 12 months. If the price goes up, it goes up. But if you're doing a project evaluation, a commercial project evaluation, $30 is about par, because things will get a lot worse before they get better. And I do not see them getting better towards at the very least before the end of the third quarter.
Right.
And Q1 2021 is where we're looking at some semblance of normalcy return to the commercial projects market.
Okay. Yes. Also, Mr. Mohit is saying, I think this price war will not end soon.
No, this was an association of convenience, a hodgepodge of players just coming together in survival mode. And the key thing here is it is predicated 5 million barrels per day cut from the Russian Federation. This is the same Russia that over the entire course of 2019 only managed to comply with what OPEC Plus had asked of them for 3 months, and of those 3 months, 2 were down to a pipeline outage. So, to put a number and give the world's media a headline to consume is very different from what data we will see. Coming out of Platts and Argus when we go forward.
Right. What are the chances of a rise in the industry? Somebody has asked. Looking over the current situation of the slump.
Some will, there'll be a lot of distress. I think I said earlier in response to another question that will shale suffer? Yes, it will suffer. Will it die? No, it won't. The Indian economy can still rely on a lot of US light sweet crude barrels coming from the States to India. There will be a lot of pain, a lot of distress. There is a question that I can tie in the questions about immediate job losses. Immediate job losses is very tricky. I think the next 3 months, if you don't see job losses, you will see a lot of furloughs. And by no means that is exclusive to Western oil majors. You will see distress in Malaysia, Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka and Pakistan in terms of midstream and downstream players as well. But at the same time, I believe that those who are, and there are a lot of students online as well, that those who are going through the various stages of their education in the industry, they should look to re-gear their education, as Mr. Balaji was saying, to get an innovative streak, to think beyond the box for an industry that will still cater to the global economy at least until 2040 at the very least.
Right. Mr. Balaji, would you like to close this for us?
Yeah, sure. I think this seminar and webinar is very apt because everybody has been affected by this COVID-19, and especially people in the oil and gas industry are very, very anxious. And I just want all of us to take this point and keep this in their mind. The industry has seen multiple crises. I mean, this crisis, and every time when a crisis happens, that looks as if that's the biggest crisis that has ever happened, and then the industry just moves on. And it's just this too shall pass. I mean, it's just we need to hang in there and see how we can do things differently, and it's just maybe 2 quarters, and we will be in a much better situation than what we are in now. And especially what Gaurav has said, countries like India and to some China, of course, there is a huge domestic demand, and we still expect some growth. We're not going to go into recession or something, but the impact will be there. But just hang in there. I mean, things are going to get better.
Okay. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. It was wonderful talking to you, and I'm sure our audience must have loved the conversation. And if there are any more questions we would feel that both of you can address, I would definitely ping both of you on that. And also, just a quick word for our audience. We have another webinar coming up on career in oil and gas. That will be on the 30th of April. Please do join us for that too. And thank you so much for actively participating in this webinar. It was lovely having you all, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and your questions. It was just amazing talking to everyone, and we should do this more often, I believe.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Garima, and my thanks to you, your team, and to Mr. Balaji. And of course, as the old saying goes, short-term crisis, long-term opportunity, right?
Everyone, yeah. That's true. Thanks, Garima. Thanks, Energy Dais, and thanks, Gaurav, for interesting thoughts. And good to be there. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And thanks, participants, for a very, enthusiastic participation, I would say. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. See you soon then. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.